Hi, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Kayla, and you're listening to the Cheat Sheet Speech Podcast, where two pediatric speech language pathologists talk about how to build communication in your everyday routine.
Yes, but before we dive in, just a quick reminder this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. If you're concerned about your child's communication, we recommend seeking an evaluation from a speech language pathologist that is licensed in your state.
All right, Carrie, what are we chatting about today?
So it's this time of year again. There's family gatherings, big meals, lots of new foods, and plenty of pressure around the table. So today we're going to talk about selective or picky eating at Thanksgiving.
Yes, parents often tell us, I just want my child to try one bite of turkey, or I feel embarrassed when they only eat rolls. So, today we'll share a few speech therapy approved tips to help make Thanksgiving a little bit more enjoyable for everyone, including your selective eater.
Yeah. So let's just start with that lead up. One of the biggest ways to support a selective eater is to help them feel prepared. So that means talking about Thanksgiving. So who will be there, what foods might be at the table, and even what their plate might look like.
Yes, we call that previewing. So you can talk about what will happen at Thanksgiving. You can even show them what will happen at Thanksgiving. That's going to help them visualize it.
Yeah, I love that idea. What are maybe 3 ways that you could show them what is going to happen at Thanksgiving?
Well, if I was working with a student or a patient, I first would have us read a book about Thanksgiving so that then they could see some pictures of what is going to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
then I would maybe set up like a pretend play activity for Thanksgiving. This could look like having Thanksgiving with our stuffed animals, or even you could take pictures of family members and help set the table, talk about
Oh,
who's
I
going
like
to sit
that.
where. And then third, I would probably practice engaging with that food at
Mm-hmm.
Thanksgiving. And it doesn't have to be the actual food itself. It could be pictures of the food, or even incorporating it in some of that pretend play by having the pretend food set.
Oh, yeah, I love that idea. So, by helping them visualize Thanksgiving, you're going to help reduce that anxiety around just a new activity, and then also
Mhm.
start to build that language around a new event so that then they can use it maybe later.
Yeah, that's a really good point about preparing them, is also just exposing them to the vocabulary. Turkey doesn't happen all year round for some
Right.
kids, right? So that might be more of a novel word, or like cranberry sauce, things like that. So giving them access before gives them the opportunity to use the language in the moment and help them feel prepared and have a little bit more autonomy over the situation. This is going to be really important for our selective eaters. What's another tip we have for some of our families to support our little ones at Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I mean, our next tip goes along with that idea of just previewing the food. We want to preview the food, like you said, to give them some, support with reducing that anxiety, and then also previewing that food to just give them some language before it happens, but also just for this exposure. We want to give multiple exposures to these food items before Thanksgiving.
I think maybe explain a little bit more, what do you mean by multiple exposures?
Yeah, so multiple exposures, it can take many opportunities for that child to be introduced to that food before they actually feel comfortable with food. So that's why we call it multiple exposures, before they might even just touch that food. So they might have to see it multiple times before they're even ready to just touch it or interact with that food. So try to engage with that food before Thanksgiving so that there's multiple opportunities to see what this food is, what you're talking about, and learn about it, and maybe what it tastes like before going into this big Thanksgiving event.
I like that. So maybe trying to have them prepare the foods, or practice making some of them. This way the food becomes less of a surprise to our little one.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you're just throwing the food at them at Thanksgiving, it's just very unlikely that a selective eater will try it, touch it, or even smell it. And even more so, it could just be very upsetting to a child to see this surprise food they've never even heard of on their plate at
Mm.
Thanksgiving.
Right. Like if you're putting an unfamiliar food on their plate and then asking them to eat it and they're eating it in front of relatives and or friends, that can be very dysregulating environment and it's just like putting so much pressure on them having to eat this unfamiliar food.
Right. And our goal is to reduce that pressure around eating food to just create this positive relationship with eating. So
Mhm.
let's maybe dive into more. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but what might these multiple exposures actually look like? Are we setting up giant Friendsgivings every single night until Thanksgiving? What are some reasonable tips here?
Yeah, no, definitely not setting up a bunch of Friendsgivings. You should do that like with your own friends instead to take a nice break. But it might be that like let's say the cranberry sauce, you incorporated it into a different meal this month. Or it could even be not the eating aspect of it. You could paint with cranberry sauce, right? You could do a sensory bin with corn just to expose them to the vocabulary, the taste, and the textures of it, even if they're not tasting it.
Right, just providing new ways to interact with that food. So then we're just exposed to the touch of it, the smell of it, and then ultimately maybe that taste of it as well.
Right. And they might not even taste the food during these initial exposures, which is totally okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. So that kind of leads into our next tip that feeding is a multi-sensory experience. So reducing that pressure on how the child engages with the food rather than just focus on exposing them to that new food.
Yeah, I really like how you said that. Like, it doesn't matter if they're actually taking the bite. We're not counting bites of the
Mhm.
food. We're doing exposure. So, painting, sensory bins, using it in a craft, even mixing it to then give the food to somebody else might be a
Right.
nice exposure. So, it's not them having to eat it, but it's like you're making maybe a banana bread for somebody else. Those are great ways to expose a child without the pressure of eating it. And then leading up to Thanksgiving, you get to preview, you get to have these multiple exposures, and we're reducing the pressure around eating the food by making it more fun.
I love that. Yeah, great ways to set yourself up for success this holiday. Now we kind of talked about that beforehand. So, leading up to
Mm-hmm.
Thanksgiving, some things we can try out this week before Thanksgiving. Let's move on to some actual tips for the day of Thanksgiving. What are your
Mm-hmm.
initial thoughts to help set up our little ones for success?
My first thought is get them involved as soon as possible.
Yeah, very similar to that preview, but on the actual day of Thanksgiving, if they can help prepare something, they're going to feel excited about it and they're going to feel more exposed to it, like you were talking about before.
Right. It just gives them, again, that sense of autonomy. I made this. I'm a little bit more in control of what it is. And that might be like getting out the bowl, stirring the mashed potatoes, pouring in the milk. You start to bring more fun aspects to the food by being able to prepare it, giving confidence and excitement.
Right. Then they can say, this is what I made. Look at what I made. They're going to be excited about it with everybody
Mm-hmm.
and just ready to show it off and feel like, okay, I'm a part of this journey. It didn't come out of nowhere. This food didn't just kind of randomly appear. So, what's another tip to support these selective eaters on Thanksgiving?
Yeah, so I guess now we're thinking if we're at the actual dinner table, what is that going to look like? I would pair safe foods with unsafe foods.
Right. I like how you said paired those foods because oftentimes with selective eating, parents will attempt this like first then strategy. So, first eat the broccoli, then you get dessert, when actually research just does not support that methodology. Rather, pair that broccoli, which we might consider an unsafe or non preferred food, with, let's say, chicken nuggets, which might feel like a safe or preferred food.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Maybe expand a little bit more on why first then strategy might not work.
Yeah. So for many of our selective eaters, they just they might refuse and ultimately refuse for a very long period of time. So this strategy just doesn't always work. And that kind of leads into more of a conversation about like hunger cues as well. They might feel those hunger cues a little bit differently than you might. So that strategy just isn't foolproof. So they might go the entire night without eating dinner. So then your kid is just tired, upset, hungry, and it's just not creating this supportive environment or relationship with eating. They're just feeling forced to eat something that they don't enjoy.
Yeah, which can be super stressful for both the parent and the child. And then now we're including the other factors of having relatives or friends at Thanksgiving. Everyone's upset or everybody's trying to chime in, which is going to again create more pressure. So why would pairing work? Couldn't they just like ignore the non-preferred food?
Yeah, and they might, and that is totally okay. It's actually very likely they might just ignore that non-preferred food, maybe even toss it off the plate a little bit, toss it off the side there. But that's okay. It just goes back to this idea that they're getting exposure to the food. So even if it's just, I see it, I see the broccoli, I know it's green, I can touch it if I want to, I can feel that broccoli. They're still getting that exposure there, but it's reducing the pressure. There's no pressure around eating it. It's just hanging out, but my safe foods are still here, and that's okay.
Exactly. I love that explanation. Again, we're not counting the bites. We need to switch our perspective a little bit more to include that we're just having these positive exposures to the food, reducing anxiety about it even being on the plate, not forcing the bite.
Right. And if you think about it, the forcing bites is just not a sustainable strategy because you won't always be in a place to force your child to eat something. So if that's what your strategy is, then when you're not there, there's just no carryover with that. So I think that's just another way to look at it. Like, how am I going to maintain this strategy? So creating that anxiety around food and having to eat everything on their plate is actually what will stay. So we want to avoid that and make sure that we're reducing that pressure around eating, and then instead just providing multiple exposures and feeling the success in, okay, I provided an exposure today.
Yeah, that's perfect. Our ultimate goal is for your child to be happy and healthy. We want them to explore the new foods and then support them at their own pace.
I love that. Yeah, support them at their own pace, especially with Thanksgiving. It's already a different environment of possibly adding some new people, different foods, maybe more structure to a meal than you typically have during the week. So, just not the time to increase pressure around eating something that's increasing pressure for everybody. And I just don't think that's what we need on this holiday.
No, definitely not what we need. We don't need to put more stress where we don't have to. Speaking of, what if you have like a relative or someone at the table who's unfamiliar with your approach? Maybe like grandma's gives you that look and it's like, why is your kid only eating 9 rolls? Or you're like, well, I have 9 rolls on my plate too, grandma. And then, or maybe your child is like, they try to chime in. They're like, you can't eat it until you eat dessert type of situation.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. The outsiders, maybe some people who aren't used to your strategy yet. What could we say? I typically just saying like we're working on building comfort with new foods at their own pace, or we're just working on exposures to new foods. They're at their own pace. I mean, you could just also say worry about your own plate, grandma. But I think if we're just trying to keep it all positive at the table, just we're working on, building comfort with new foods at our own pace at this time.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. We have to support our little ones across the meal by inviting them to participate in it. We want them to help maybe prepare foods if that's possible. We're trying to pair our preferred with non-preferreds and then reducing that pressure of not having to eat it. How might we encourage or support the child in trying the new foods without actually asking them to try it?
Yeah. So there are some ways to just start encouraging, touching, tasting, trying that new food. Again, we want to move at their own pace, so they might not be ready for it, but that common saying that says like, don't play with your food. That's actually what we want to do.
And yeah, ditch that. Start playing with your
Done with
food.
that.
What might that look like?
So, I mean, we kind of talked about in the previewing some, pretend like play situations, but also like getting them involved in that cooking. So it could definitely
Mhm.
look like it just engaging with that food in a fun way. But even just simply on your plate, you could pick up, that piece of broccoli and drop it in the
Mhm.
mashed potatoes, or maybe like roll a piece of chicken in your hands, roll, roll, roll. That's going to expose
Mhm.
them to that texture of the chicken and just feel more at ease with this new thing that they might try later.
Right. It doesn't look like much. It feels like this play, but the child's actually like feeling the food, becoming more familiar with it. And it is, in terms of like a sensory aspect, a step closer to eating the food.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So when you are eating, something else that you could do is just use that descriptive language, such as like, ooh, this is crunchy, or brr, cold yogurt. I also like these I wonder statements.
Mhm.
So I wonder if this is hot or cold, or I wonder if the carrot crunches louder or the pepper crunches louder. Listen to me. Which one do you think? The carrot
Mhm.
or the pepper?
Yeah, that's great. I think we talk about this probably across all of our podcasts, but modeling the behavior that you would like to see is really great. If I'm the child and I'm wondering, like, oh, I wonder which one is going to be crunchier,
Right.
we can cheer for the one that's crunchier. So now I'm curious, I'm interested. Again, I don't have to eat it. So it's taking off that pressure, building the curiosity. I like that idea. And I like that also with touching and playing with the food. You also mentioned some of that descriptive language, like using I wonder statements. Is there a reason you're choosing I wonder and maybe not other language?
Yeah. So I think there's definitely some language we can try to avoid in these situations, which we've talked about kind of in our play based strategies, but just trying to reduce those questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, as I said, I've definitely talked about this before, but instead of asking, like, do you want to eat this or do you want dinner? Let's just kind of reduce those questions and try to use those I wonder statements, because when we do ask these questions, the answer is typically no. And then we're
Mm-hmm.
just kind of at a standstill, right?
Yeah, exactly. You pose the question, you kind of already know what the answer is going to be. It's not going to
Yeah.
be the answer that you want it to be. So, avoiding that. And we also want them to know that their voice and opinion matters. So, if they were to say no, you should honor that, right? Like you asked a question, they answered it no. If somebody asked me, like, do you want to get ice cream tonight? Usually I'd probably say yes. But if I wasn't in the mood, I say no. And they're like, well, you have to eat ice cream. We don't want to eat a food that we don't like or don't want to eat at that time. So what would you say instead of these questions?
Right. Yeah. As we kind of mentioned before, definitely those I wonder statements, but we can also say things that are just actions. So it's time to eat, or you can offer a choice. So, do you
Mm-hmm.
want broccoli or rice with your chicken nuggets tonight? So you're still putting that safe food, but you're giving them a choice of maybe a non-preferred food, and they could still say no to either. But then you can just kind of go with it and see what comes, if they come up with something new, or you can just kind of say like, okay, we're gonna pick this one, we're gonna put this one on the plate today, type of thing. But if you're offering choices, you're giving them more autonomy over that situation.
Yeah, I like how you phrased that because you gave the choice and then left in that safe food. So you know that like they will be eating the chicken based on the way that you kind of posed that
Mm-hmm.
phrase, so that you're setting them up for a little bit more success by then just choosing the other options on the plate.
Right.
Um, yeah, so I think also like avoiding some of those words is like this is yummy versus is yucky. Instead, sticking more to the language that just describes the food, like you mentioned before, crunchy, sticky, hot, cold.
Right, because if you use that yummy and yucky, they could end up liking it later. So it's just,
Mhm.
everything, they're still learning and growing. And same with our palates, we're still changing things. So if we kind of put it in this yucky pile, it's hard to kind of dig it back up from having
Mhm.
this characteristic of it's yucky. And I was
Mhm.
also going to say too, when you're talking about like like giving those two choices, right? Like we have that preferred food already on the plate and the choices with that non-preferred food, because we want them to feel that safety as well. So never give that choice between the non-preferred food and the preferred food, right? We wouldn't
Yeah.
want to say, do you want chicken nuggets or broccoli? Because then you're kind of left with, they're just going to consistently pick chicken nuggets. So keeping your choices, you could give two choices between two preferred foods and then two
Mhm.
choices between two non-preferred foods as well if you want, but right,
Mhm.
not mixing between those choices.
Right. It kind of sets you almost up for like a first then situation
Right.
if you contrast them. That's a really good point. Well, those are some awesome ideas for our selective eater at Thanksgiving. Maybe a little recap. So we talked about leading up to the holiday, talk about it, preview it, play with it, experiment with it, all the things that you can do to help your child visualize what Thanksgiving is going to look like. Then when you're at Thanksgiving, you want to try to focus on reducing any pressure that you can around the meal. For your language, you can use those I wonder statements and limit the questions. Just talk about all of your senses around the food, and then pairing familiar with the non-familiar foods.
Yeah. Hopefully, these tips will help just reduce pressure around eating for both the parent and the child this holiday. So just remember, it's a holiday. So the child is already out of routine. Provide that grace and space just for your child to thrive.
I love that. Okay, let's move on to our speech spotlight.
Awesome. Yeah. So, speech spotlight, we're just going to expand on this conversation around eating, even though I think it's making both of us hungry. But in our speech spotlight today, we're going to talk about those feeding milestones.
All right, let's do it. And we should have eaten breakfast before this, now that we mentioned that. I thought it would be helpful if we go over what foods and liquids are recommended to your child at each stage of development. So let's get into that.
Yeah. So, why don't we just start with what age should we be introducing solid food?
So, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends introducing solids at around 6 months of age.
Right. Yes. And so this is going to depend on your child's readiness. So we're going to look and see, can they sit in an upright position in that high chair with
Mhm.
just minimal support? Are they showing anticipation for food? Can they hold a bottle independently? Are they showing hunger signs?
Yeah, that's a great point. These are all for like safety reasons for
Mhm.
that swallow. What might anticipation of food look like?
Right. Yeah. So if a child so let's say you're bringing the bottle or spoon to their mouth, are they opening their mouth, anticipating
Mhm.
that food, or maybe sticking their tongue out, trying to anticipate that bottle?
So if a child's showing these readiness signs, where should we start?
Yeah. So as far as the food goes, so at this 6 month stage, start with purees and those meltable soft solids.
Okay, right. And so then if we're thinking about liquids, you could start to introduce drinking from a cup at this age, but you want to make sure you're starting with like small single sips. So you're
Right.
present while this is happening.
Yes. And
Doing
like
one sip at a
not
time.
a full cup, just like
Yeah.
a very little small sip in the cup, and they can practice that
Yeah.
cup drinking. And then between that 7 and 9 months stage, in that little range there, you can start transitioning to just some thicker purees and then
Mhm.
also some of those soft solids. So that might look like pancake or cheese and typically cut up into strips. So at this age range, children start to lateralize, which means move their tongue side to side without
Mhm.
moving their jaw. So they're not like turning their whole head when they are using their tongue,
Mhm.
which will support that creating a bolus is what we call it, which is just a ball of food. Sounds kind of gross, in
Mhm.
their mouth to swallow it. So you'll see that, and then you'll also see a transition between this munching chewing pattern and then starting towards that 9-month range to introduce this diagonal chewing pattern, which is what we use as adults.
Yeah, maybe talk a little bit more about just like the munching versus the chewing pattern.
Yeah, so that munching pattern versus that diagonal chewing pattern. Munching is just up and down chewing pattern. So, right. And then that diagonal chew pattern takes that up and down, but also adds in this side to side movement. So it's kind of like, I don't know, round-ish in a way.
Right.
But it's a more mature pattern that we use to break down food.
Right. It's almost like grinding up that food.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you tune into the YouTube so you can see Carrie's demonstrations of the different patterns of chewing. That's really key. And then thinking about the liquids at the 7 to 9-month age, their cup drinking skills should be a little bit stronger now. So you can lean towards more 1 to 3 sips at a time rather than just the single sip. You can also introduce a straw at this age. Again, you need to be careful about how much liquid they're actually consuming through this straw. They can only handle about 1 to 3 sips and in order to coordinate their suck, swallow, breathe pattern.
Right. Yeah. So when we're swallowing, we have to coordinate breathing and swallowing and sucking from that straw. So if we have way too many sips in there, then that could lead to a choking or gagging event. And so we just want to make sure we limit how much liquid is in these cups to what they can handle. And so now if we kind of move up to that 10 to 12 months stage, babies can start to handle those chunky purees and soft solids. So they can also start taking a bite off of a larger food. So you have like a banana, you can take a bite off that banana, or a cracker, take a bite off the cracker, or a soft cookie. You will start to see them really starting to utilize that like munching pattern and also that diagonal rotary chewing pattern. So you're going to see both of those patterns still, but emerging towards that more mature pattern consistently.
Awesome. Yeah. So then for the liquids at the 10 to 12 months, your child would start to shift even more independent with that cup drinking, and they'll do it over a bottle or breastfeeding. And then you will see less anterior loss of liquid, and they can sustain about 3 or more sips of a liquid from a cup at a time.
Yeah. So they're able to like sip, and then take a break and breathe, and able to coordinate that and knowing, okay, I have to take a break and breathe, versus just putting it all back.
Yeah.
All right. By 12 months of age, they will be eating food with mixed consistencies. So mixing those purees and soft solids. So that could look like mashed potatoes and noodles, or maybe some like pieces of fruit with yogurt. They can start to handle those bigger pieces of soft table foods. So, we were cutting them up before. They might be able to handle a little bit bigger of a piece and break that down. They're able to use their tongue to move from side to side in their mouth. And that's really going to help with breaking down food.
Yeah, that's really important as they continue to progress. They can also drink from a straw without help or spilling. At 12 months, they have more increased independence with eating and drinking.
Yeah, and then by 18 months, they can handle foods that require more chewing and bigger pieces. They consistently move food from both sides of their mouth. So you start chewing on one side, move it over, start chewing on the other side. They're going to be mostly independent with eating and using utensils. So you may have to cut up some foods for them, but really just more of those difficult ones, something that's kind of chewy, harder to break down.
Right, exactly. That's awesome. Okay, so this is just like a general overview of some of the feeding milestones. Just for your frame of reference, remember you want to make sure that your child is ready across the stages. So we're presenting them to you as they progress, as their oral motor system progresses, their hunger readiness. So don't jump to something because it's just at that age. Make sure you're seeing the development patterns to make sure you support them safely throughout the process of eating. What are some signs to seek an evaluation or to speak with your pediatrician?
Right. Yeah. I like how you were saying that we want to make sure that we're moving at our own kiddo's pace. So if you're maybe seeing some of these signs, that would be a great time to just seek an evaluation or speak with your pediatrician about maybe getting an evaluation or just investigating further. So first, if your child is showing any signs of distress when it comes to mealtime. So this could look like every time you try to put them in the high chair, they start crying, kicking, whatever, or they're pushing food away or turning their head. Look to see if this is consistently happening. If this is, randomly, they're getting upset about food, that's pretty typical. But if they're consistently distressed and they're always at meal times and you're seeing this pattern, I recommend speaking with your pediatrician. Second, if they're gagging, coughing when they eat or drink, or if you see changes in their face, so this could look like redness or tears in their eyes every time they eat or drink, that is another sign that we want to seek an evaluation or talk to our pediatrician about it. And then third, I would say if they're refusing or just showing difficulties with certain textures. So if they're refusing all purees or if they're refusing, all meats, like harder types of food to chew, if they're chewing something up and spitting it back out, that might be a certain texture. That's another good time to speak with your pediatrician.
Yeah, those are all great tips. I think some people aren't aware that speech language pathologists, they address feeding. Also, occupational therapists can also address feeding as well, different kinds of aspects of it. So there are these resources within like the early intervention teams that we've talked about before. So if you're talking to your pediatrician, you're wondering who the other resources are, think about SLPs and OTs when you're thinking about feeding.
Great point. Yeah.
Okay, that's a wrap on our speech spotlight for today. Let's finish up with our communication countdown.
Yes. So today we're going to just wrap it all up with our top 5 tips for supporting selective eaters at Thanksgiving.
All right. So we spoke in depth kind of about this during our chatter today, but we just wanted to give you a nice wrap up. 5 easy takeaways to support your little one next week. Let's break it down.
All right. So number 1, preview the day. Start talking about Thanksgiving now. Have them come to the grocery store with you and buy those foods. Read a book about Thanksgiving. Start setting up pretend play for Thanksgiving or crafts, whatever it is. Start talking about Thanksgiving now, but also help them visualize that Thanksgiving as well. Let them see it instead of just like verbalizing what's going on. Number 2, get them involved. Have them set the table. Have them stir the mashed potatoes. Have them, pour in ingredients for that pumpkin pie. Get them involved on the day of Thanksgiving. Number 3, pair those safe foods with new foods. So exposing children to those foods at the same time. They can see it and explore it at their own pace. Number 4, reduce questions. We say this for everything, but reduce those questions. I wonder statements are great, or just talk about what you're eating. Focus on yourself. What's on your plate? What can you talk about and describe and use language for your plate, and less energy on other people's plates? Worry about yourself. And number 5, just have fun. It's okay to have fun with food. Having fun will just reduce that pressure and expose them to food in different ways.
Right. That's going to leave you on a positive note. We love all of those tips. That's a wrap. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.